Let's talk about testing. And testing is probably not as interesting as you would expect it to be if you're a software developer. If you're a software developer, you might get even a bit passionate about testing because you might think, hey, cool, we can write like a test pipeline, we can do like a CI/CD thing where you like run this on GitHub Actions or whatever CI tool you're using. However, testing in the regulatory sense is totally different, and it's pretty much a gigantic mess. The first problem kind of like is that the 62304 has lots of different words for testing. And again, the 62304 is this ancient standard, which is like 20 years old essentially. And 20 years ago, it probably still wasn't very current at the time. So 20 years ago, it was probably describing how software was built 10 years ago then. So that's like 30 years ago. So it's a gigantic mess. But I'll show you how the most minimalistic, simple implementation is for regulatory compliance, and how you could create a more advanced implementation if you want to do further automations on top of the automations we already have in Formwork, which in my opinion are of course pretty cool, but I'm obviously extremely biased. All right, first off, let's do something very boring and let's actually look into the standard here. So again, this is 62304. It has all sorts of different ideas of testing. So you can see there's software system testing, there's integration testing. So you don't really know what they mean. And then again, it's so generic. I think this was page 25. So generic that essentially even reading it is completely not helpful. Oh, wait, page 25 is actually not page 25. Okay. So it kind of like says, hey, for example, you should do something called software unit verification. Most software developers have actually never heard about verification. And then it just says the manufacturer should perform the software unit verification and document the results. And you're like, okay, dude, like what should I do? And what is verification? And the crazy thing is that even auditors have different ideas of this. And then there's also software integration and integration testing, where you kind of like think, wait, we don't really do integration. Like integration was this thing you did 30 years ago, where like you would maybe have separate teams develop separate like executable files, like the exe files in Windows, if you're as old as I am. And then at some stage they would like put them all together and it would like explode and it would be a gigantic mess. And then the standard authors would essentially say, no, we need to ensure that this integration stuff doesn't blow up anymore. And now we need to do integration testing. And this is kind of like a very ancient concept. And nowadays integration testing is, I guess, a bit interpreted a bit differently. Anyway, you should do this and we'll kind of like look at how to implement that. And also do something like regression testing, all that stuff. All right, so I'll kind of like stop there and just show you, here's the quick overview where you also, again, there's the mapping table where you like see different testing requirements, but that's pretty much just what I just told you earlier. Let's actually dive into how a typical compliant documentation for testing looks like, and then kind of like reverse engineer how like a good automated procedure for this would look like. All right, so if we go to the templates on our website, we actually have a testing template here somewhere called Software System Test Plan. And as a quick reminder, we had the software requirements document, right? So we had the software requirements template here, software requirements list. And as a quick reminder, here you would like spell out the features of your software, and I won't go into that much detail. And the main requirement we're looking at today is that each of these features has to be covered by at least one test. And in Formwork, likewise, we also had the more elegant implementation where instead of creating this terrible table, which is a gigantic mess, you can just do it in Formwork and it's nice and structured and it generates spreadsheets for you. Now, the big question, of course, is like we have to, for each of these things, we need a test. So, okay, keep this table in mind. You have a table of features. Then we go back to the test plan here. And here you have a table of tests. Okay. and the simple and, in my opinion, extremely terrible implementation here, if you would be not using Formwork, if you would be doing this yourself or in any other tool, would be, okay, each of your software tests here has an ID, so ID 1, ID 2, and then it is related to an SR ID, so software requirement ID. So you say like, hey, test ID 1, it covers software requirement 1. And test ID 2, it also covers software requirement 1. So in this case, you have a software requirement with the ID 1, which is covered by 2 tests, tests 1 and 2. And that's how a simple implementation would look like if you would, for example, copy-paste this to Google Sheets, what I actually did in our old videos before we had Formwork. And you can already see where these problems are when linking stuff, because it might work for your first implementation, but now what happens if you kind of like change an ID or you change the content of a software requirement in the other table, and of course this table doesn't really get updated and you're completely screwed. So you don't really know whether your documentation is complete at any point in time. Also, the next question kind of like is, hey, what could you do this in Jira or whatever other project management tool you have? And the short answer is, initially you think, yes, it's possible, because you would create like a custom whatever ticket type or so, where you say like, okay, the ticket has an ID, it has this many-to relation to this other ticket type, to software requirements, then it has these other field description steps, all that stuff. And that would be great, and maybe you could export it. But the big problem, which always fails in these tools, is again versioning, because you need to be able to pull out this list of software tests for each old version of your medical device. So an auditor might tell you, hey, pull up the list of software tests and software requirements for the version which you released 2 years ago, version 0.1 or so. And you need to pull up that version with its links to the software requirements at that point in time with the actual list. And most project management tools, they don't have what I essentially call Git in SQL. Like they don't have a versioned kind of storage of these things. Like in Jira, if you kind of like change a relation here, it just overwrites the existing item and you're losing the history essentially. You can't recreate how a software test, for example, looked in the past and which things it was related to and what the content of those things was in the past. So anyway, long rant about Jira. As you know, I don't like Jira, but generally speaking, it's just not possible to build this in other tools unless they have some pretty crazy versioning, but they actually, I don't know of any tool here. Now, actually about the content. We should be talking about the content and not about how broken everything is. So, okay, so for each test, you have like a description. There's just a human readable description, like, okay, this test kind of like tests whether a login with the correct email and password succeeds. And for each test, you have steps, like okay, step 1, a user enters the email, enters the password, clicks login, and you have an expected result, and then the actual result. So the expected result is, okay, in this case, this seems to be a correct login combination. So the result should be, okay, redirect to the account page. And then you do this test, and yes, you've noticed this is a manual test. And you would fill in the actual result. So the actual result is hopefully the same as the expected result, that it actually gets, that the user actually gets redirected in this case. And then pass, you enter pass or fail here, for example. And that's how you do testing. And you probably have like 1,000 questions now, like why are we doing manual testing? How does this look in Formwork and so on? Let's look at those in order. First, let's look at how this looks like in Formwork, because that's, in my opinion, a much better implementation than filling out this super terrible table. All right, let's actually take a look at the requirements we had. Okay, this is a pretty good one. Regularly show a notification to the user to ask them how they're doing, because as you remember, we're documenting this depression app. And then maybe you want to write a test for this. And by the way, this is me getting distracted, but you have something called a sanity check in Formwork. And it actually gives you hints on what your documentation is missing. So in this case, we can see, oh, look, our software requirements 1, 2, and 3, they're missing software tests. And software requirement 2 even is missing user needs. So we're doing a terrible job here. Okay, but that's cool to know. So yeah, we need a software test for this one. So let's write that. So you navigate to software tests here. You can even auto-generate them with our crazy AI, but I'll keep things simple for now. And again, you see there's an internal ID which is assigned to this, and then you have to write a title. Okay, like test the notification feature. Install the app and ensure and verify that the notification is displayed. Like whatever, the initial notification. Okay, and then here, this is pretty much the exact same fields you just saw on the table. Is like, okay, step 1, install the app from the App Store, open the app, wait for a notification, whatever. And then expected, you write the expected result for each of these steps. App is installed, app runs, or whatever, and then notification is displayed. And now, most importantly, you link it to these software requirements where you say, yeah, this was the test for the software requirement 1. You save it. And now that's kind of like it. So now you've done pretty much everything up to this column, up to the expected column. So we've done the description, we've done the steps, we've done the expected results, but we haven't actually performed this test yet. So in Formwork, this is kind of like separated, which by the way is more compliant because auditors have this weird concept that you kind of like define your tests first before you run them. So you have something called a test plan and then a test report. And Formwork has this concept of software test runs. So now we've defined the software test and we would say, yes, I'm super motivated to do a manual testing session right now of my device because I want to release it tomorrow or whatever. So you go to software test runs and you create something new, software test run here. And you say like, okay, my software test run today, whatever. And then you should add, this is like another one of the 65304 requirements. You need to like define what was the context of the software test run, like on which hardware were you running it, and did you have any other like specific limitations in your setup? So you would say like, I don't know, running this on an iPhone 15. Okay, and now you like select the software test which you want to include in this run. So far we only have one test, so let's select that. Already did that, save. And now you kind of like see you have something called like a test run here, and you have like a nice colorful summary, like, okay, one test run is planned, and this is this test. You can even filter here, so look at all test runs, only the planned ones, only the success, so none, and all the others, these are of course also empty. And now the idea would be, okay, now you sit down in your manual testing setup, full of motivation to do manual testing, and you would kind of like go through this list, and this list only has one entry right now, and like perform these tests. So you would look at this test and say like, instructions, install the app and verify the notification is displayed. Okay, I go through the steps, and then I look at the expected results. Okay, cool, I'm doing that. Then I click on that, and then now I can like describe my test results, and you can say like, maybe to keep things super orderly, you could actually say, you could literally actually, I'll do a shortcut here where you say, oh, sorry, I just crashed the software. Where you, oh, wow, I can really crash it this way. Okay, where you actually write out the results here, like app is installed successfully, app runs, and then notification is displayed. Then you would say like, look, cool, this was a success, save that. Then you see in the summary now this has updated and it's a success. And that's how you would do testing. Like this is the bare minimum regulatory implementation for regulatory compliance. So maybe to recap, what have we done here? So we've created a software test which covers our software requirement, in this case software requirement 1. For full compliance, we'd of course need to cover all software requirements. Technically you could cover all in one test, but that would sound super shady. And then we've executed this test run and actually run it, and it was actually successful. So that's like what's needed for regulatory compliance. Now, there are actually two questions we can get into now. The first one, which you probably have, is like, okay, can we automate this? And the second one probably is, well, have we actually covered all of the 62304 things we actually looked at? Because we just looked at all these super clunky things with like integration testing and verification, whatever, all that stuff. So in order, can you automate testing? The short answer is yes, but it's probably not worth your time. And the even shorter answer is, in 99 out of 100 startups which I've consulted, and I've consulted probably at 200 now, usually this sort of automation just doesn't make sense. And let me explain why. So typically how you would create an automation would be, okay, you have like some sort of test suite, it runs on GitHub Actions, and you get some sort of output. Unfortunately, the output usually is just like all tests pass or some tests didn't pass. And then if some tests didn't pass, you maybe get the ID of the section in the code where those tests were defined, and that's kind of like it. That's the output you get out of GitHub Actions. Okay, so that's cool for day-to-day development because you see like, hey, is my test suite passing? That's cool. However, for regulatory compliance, we need more information than our test suite is passing. We need the information which we just looked at here in the software tests. For each test, which let's just say you would be defining your test in your code, you would be writing your test, right? Each test would well, you could probably get away without a title and without a description, but you would still kind of like need some sort of human summary of what this test is actually doing. So you would need this in your code, right? And I mean, let's actually do something really fun. Let's actually look into the Formwork code, just so you know, just so we can have an example of how tests are defined. And by the way, we have a gigantic amount of tests. Okay, so let's actually say, wait, we actually have a software requirements test, maybe? Or how about this system test spec, whatever. Okay. So you could see, okay, here you have like a spec which says like, okay, you have something called a system test, which I think is the model for the software test we're looking at, and you can say, and this is still quite human readable because it's our spec, and this is not usually the case in many other programming languages. So you can see, okay, well, here you have a spec, like it excludes tests that are for the future. So apparently you have a method like for current. And if you call that, that kind of like doesn't show tests that are defined to be in the future. Formwork has a feature where you can define stuff for the future to kind of like to create drafts of tests for like future versions. And then here you see like, okay, we're expecting the system test if we use like for current not to include like a future test, and we define the future test up here. Okay, so that's how a typical test is defined. And now looking at this code, do we have all the information to fill this in an automated way or whatever? Do we have like a title? Do we have a human description? I'm not so sure. Like you could kind of like parse this out, and I think if you can actually, there's some sort of way to output this. You could kind of like just like string these strings together, and then you would come up with a description. It's still not super human readable. Do you have human readable steps, like where you say like, okay, step 1 is it does this, step 2 is it does that? Not really. Like you would have to probably write these out in human language further below. Like, I mean, you could kind of like export this, but for more complex tests, this will become a huge mess. Like many tests are not one-liners like this. Do you get like this, like do you get the expected and actual results? So if we would be defining multiple steps here, we would need to like output that to human language, and then we would need to actually also output the result in human language. And no, we don't get this. This is kind of like this will just result in a Boolean value. In this case, this is just like true, or it won't raise a test exception. Okay, so far we're doing terribly. But now is the biggest one. Like, yeah, actually every test has to be linked to software requirements. So how would we do this in our code? Like, okay, we would probably for, I don't know, for this test, we would maybe have a software requirement which says, yeah, I mean, this for current method, it excludes tests that are for the future. Okay, cool. But now we have to link that to the software requirement. And then like, okay, where's your software requirement defined? Probably in Formwork somewhere, or probably in some Excel spreadsheet, or worst case in Jira. That would be a catastrophe. And then you would say like, yeah, it's in software requirements, it's software requirements 1. Okay, now you need to somehow, let's just say SWR1. Now you will need to somehow add this relation to SWR1 somehow into the metadata of this test. And this would be, I don't know, you could do it. I think many test suites can be extended in this way, that you like attach metadata to tests. And I used to code a lot in Clojure, which is a niche language where you could extend a lot of stuff. And there I was like experimenting with these implementations. But then it's a gigantic mess again, right? Because now you have attached the SWR1 string or whatever to this test. But what now happens if this requirement, let's say, just gets deleted in a future version? Like, do you have some sort of automated way to go through your code to now check the tests here, which kind of like refer to SWR1? It'll probably be extremely messy. So keeping stuff in sync is a new problem again now. So the pragmatic solution which we suggest is keep it all in Formwork, keep it all in one system, use the software test here, and do manual testing. I know it sucks, but that's the way it is. And thinking about that is, you can get away if you have like 20 to 30 software requirements, and let's just say 20 to 30 tests covering those. Doing a manual test of that might be doable in like one afternoon, which is not too bad, because most medical device software releases, which we see like the fastest or manufacturers have been releasing, is like every 2 to 3 weeks, which is crazy fast in the medical device industry. And in that case, if you just take 1 day to test manually every time, it's not super bad. Like, however, if of course you have like 100 or 200 software requirements and 100 or 200 manual tests, then of course you're completely screwed. But then the leverage is not in automating the 200 tests, the leverage is in reducing the number of tests and reducing the number of software requirements. And again, no one tells you that you can't even do automatic tests like this on the side too. Like, you can do this, and this is great for your software development because it gives you confidence that you're actually building solid software. Like, no one tells you you actually have to reuse all of that for your regulatory documentation. For your regulatory documentation, you can just keep it high level and define these manual tests. All right, final question. Does this actually fulfill all the 60304 requirements? Long story short, yes. If we go back to the mapping table, you can see you had different type of tests. Like, you had like integration tests, but you also had something called regression tests, and I think system tests or whatever. The long story short is, yes, you kind of like just say like, the line of arguing here is you just say like, yeah, we're doing software tests, and they are system integration and regression tests. So the manual tests we define here, they cover all the 60304 sections of testing. And generally speaking, this is accepted by auditors because no one forces you to say like, oh no, now we have to do separate integration tests and separate regression tests. That doesn't make a lot of sense because by definition, something, for example, is a regression test if you test, like if you essentially run an old test on a new version just to make sure that it's still passing. Yeah, so that's the idea. And I've been talking for way too long already, but the cool thing is in Formwork, of course, is again, now we've defined the software test, and you can see our requirements overview is updated now. So you see the user need, software requirement here, and now also the software test. So this gives you a great overview that we're doing a better job at covering stuff now. So one of our software requirements, it also has a software test now. So that's really great. It'll also be included in the audit export. So you now have something called a software test specification and software test run. Software test run should be plural. Oh man, probably this was still my code. And now if we download the spreadsheets, and I won't do it, you already saw it earlier, you also get the nice formatted data which you can then hand in to your auditors. And again, importantly, all of this is versioned. So the software test list we're looking at right now, this is for version 0.1 of the software. If we would be creating like a new version in the future, 0.2, then this would be archived, and this would like remain in it will remain in place. It would be frozen, and that's very important because like you would need to go back again. You would be able to go back in time if an auditor asks you and retrieve your old list of software tests with the old content of all the software tests. So all of that is also essentially done in Formwork. Now, finally, this is of course very great. Like, now we can go to the sanity check, and you can see, okay, software requirement 1, it's no longer mentioned here because now software requirement 1 actually has user needs and it has system tests. So that's super great. So we did a great job of reducing the number of errors in our sanity check. So we're getting there with our documentation. Anyway, that was software testing. The next steps for you would be, well, first you write your software requirements, and then you start writing software tests. And maybe as a quick side note is, don't start too early with this. If you're still super deep in development and your software is changing every day and your software features are changing every day, then just don't do this yet. Do this once you know that your features are mostly frozen. Oh man, it's time to end this video. That your features are mostly frozen and are no longer changing. Otherwise, it'll be hell, right? Otherwise, you change your software a bit, and now you have to go through this entire list again of software requirements and change stuff around. Same for software tests. Define those once your first prototype is kind of like finished, at least based on the specs in your mind. And then it's time to like do some sort of documentation like this. And if you have questions about automating stuff and you still don't believe me that manual tests, 20 to 30 tests are the way to go, you can always ping us for consulting, but you can also save your money and just kind of like go with this, because again, 99 times out of 100, this is the most pragmatic solution. All right, good luck with your tests, and talk to you in the next video about something which is hopefully equally interesting.